Welcome, everyone. Today we are continuing our dive into the history of Pan-Africanism, a story of foresight, unity, and enduring dreams. Now, while the 19th century foundation of Pan-Africanism were largely philosophical and spiritual, the Caribbean ignited the political fire that would make the movement revolutionary. And by the early 20th century, the Caribbean became a hotbed of a Pan-African thought, not just in the islands themselves, but also through the diaspora communities in London, New York, and West Africa, where many Caribbean thinkers had migrated. Let's begin with Henry Sylvester Williams, a Trinidadian lawyer and activist. In 1900, the year 1900, he organized the first Pan-African conference in London, bringing together intellectuals from the US, the Caribbean, and Africa to denounce racism, colonialism, and global white supremacy. This was the first time the word Pan-African was used as a political label, marking the birth of the movement as an organized international force. Then came Marcus Garvey, perhaps the most influential Pan-Africanist of the 20th century. He was born in Jamaica. Garvey founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association, the UNIA, in 1914, which grew to become the largest mass movement of Black people in history, with millions of followers across the US, the Caribbean, Latin America, Europe, and Africa. Garvey preached racial pride, economic independence, and the return to Africa, not just as a homeland, but as a symbol of Black liberation. His Black Star Line shipping company was meant to be the literal and symbolic vehicle of that return. While the project ultimately collapsed mostly due to sabotage, the psychological impact of Garvey's message was profound. Even those who disagreed with Garvey's methods, like W.E.B. Du Bois, recognized his impact. He made Pan-Africanism popular and accessible beyond the elite intellectual circles. He also made it something that ordinary people aspired, to, in that it made them see themselves as people who could determine their own, not just present, but future. That's why you had people from all corners of the virtually all corners of the globe contributing, their financial tokens to the achievement of that new African personality, that new idea of being Black and of having pride in being Africans. So fast forward to the mid 20th century, and you find a second wave of Caribbean radicals who took Pan-Africanism in new directions. Think of let's think of George Padmore, a Trinidadian who moved to London and later Ghana, where he became a key advisor to Kwame Nkrumah. Padmore helped organize the Fifth Pan-African Congress in Manchester in 1945. And this Congress was a turning point that connected Pan-Africanism directly to anti-colonial liberation struggles across Africa. But we'll return to that later, that conference later. Now, and then there's C.L.R. James, also from Trinidad. He was a Marxist theorist, historian, and cultural critic. C.L.R. James challenged both colonialism and capitalism, and saw Black liberation as inherently tied to global class struggle. His writings deeply influenced later Pan-African and anti-imperialist thinkers. So these Caribbean thinkers weren't just theorizing, they were organizing, mobilizing, and building bridges between Africans at home and those in the diaspora. They believed that Africa's liberation was tied to the freedom of Black people everywhere. It was really the Caribbean that gave Pan-Africanism its revolutionary heartbeat, its loudest, boldest voices, calling for action, solidarity, and transformation. As Pan-Africanism matured into the 20th century, one figure became especially central to its intellectual and organizational framework: W.E.B. Du Bois. Du Bois, an African American scholar, sociologist, and activist, was a transatlantic thinker who dedicated his life to the idea of global Black consciousness. Beginning in 1919, he played a role in organizing a series of Pan-African congresses, which brought together African and diasporic leaders to confront colonialism and racism. And we've talked about the first one, and talked about the first Congress, and then we've talked a little on the fifth Congress, which was very phenomenal, and but we're going to be talking some more about it. So Du Bois was involved, in organizing these congresses. So these early congresses, although largely attended by mostly elite voices, were groundbreaking. They demanded the end of colonial rule and racial discrimination, and called for the self-determination of African peoples everywhere in the world. But it was the fifth Pan-African Congress held in Manchester in 1945 that marked a major turning point. Because unlike earlier congresses, this one featured a new generation of militant and pragmatic leaders, many from the Caribbean and Africa, including Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, and George Padmore. So the tone shifted from protests to preparation for liberation. It was no longer just about appealing to colonial powers, but about organizing for independence and unity. We cannot remember this period without recognizing the profound role played by Paul Robeson. Now, Robeson was a celebrated African American actor, singer, and activist. But he brought Pan-African ideals out of intellectual halls and into concert venues, labor movements, and global cultural spaces in ways that nobody before him had ever had the ability to do. He was a close ally of W.E.B. Du Bois and a fierce internationalist. Robeson linked the African struggle for independence with the Black struggles in the US for human rights and equality, um, with the struggles in the Caribbean and beyond in a profound way. He sang in multiple African languages, studied African history, and publicly condemned colonialism and imperialism long before it was safe to do so. Whereas, not to undermine the work of intellectuals, but there was a difference. So, whereas people like W.E.B. Du Bois and other intellectuals worked through essays, conferences, and academic discourse, Robeson moved crowds through his remarkable voice and presence. Please create time, find time to look for videos of this uniquely talented and well built actor to see why he brought exceptional attention to the Pan African cause. He gave speeches at anti colonial rallies, sang for African trade unionists, and even tried to attend the 1945 Congress in Manchester. Though he was unable to attend, his solidarity was well known and acknowledged by attendees, and it was also something that gave a lot of them even more pride in being there and confidence in the work they were doing at that conference, even though he was not there physically. Paul Robeson's global celebrity amplified the Pan-African message. And even when the US government tried to silence him by revoking his passport in the 1950s, he refused to back down. Instead, he said, and I quote, "The artist must elect to fight for freedom or slavery. I have made my choice." I love this statement for being simple yet profound, you know, because as artists today, it's not enough for us to say, "Oh, I'm not political. I just want to focus on my art, on or my creative endeavor, and all of that." But I believe that all art is political. So whether we decide to keep quiet in the face of the Black Lives Matter movement and the problems that movement is trying to address, or we decide to keep quiet about the travels of the Sorosoke generation in Lagos, which or the political the youth riots in Kenya. If we decide to be quiet about these things, what we're doing implicitly is agreeing that things should continue the way they are. So, as artists, we cannot say we're not political and just keep quiet. We must take a position. And by keeping quiet, we are already taking a position to accept all the ills and all of that. So I really love that statement by Paul Robeson. His cultural activism, and from he used this cultural activism to expand the reach of Pan-Africanism beyond academia and politics. It became something felt in the hearts of everyday people across race and class. He helped translate Pan-Africanism into music, performance, and public emotion. It was fantastic what he did. As we reflect on this era, let's not only remember the manifestos and congresses, but also the songs, speeches, and sacrifices that made Pan-Africanism a living force. So, having said all that, Pan-Africanism did not remain just a diasporic affair. It began to take hold among emerging national leaders in Africa itself. For example, in Nigeria, which was then under British colonial rule. One of the earliest Nigerian voices sympathetic to Pan-Africanism was Herbert Macaulay, often considered the father of Nigerian nationalism. He was the grandson of Bishop Ajayi Crowther. Now, Macaulay, though not a theorist of Pan-Africanism in the formal sense, believed in the political and cultural unity of African peoples. He played a foundational role in resisting colonial domination and was committed to regional West African solidarity. He was in founding the NCNC, you know. Now, Macaulay also mentored the young Nnamdi Azikiwe at the time, who would later become Nigeria's most prominent Pan-Africanist figure. Now, Azikiwe, popularly known as Zik of Africa, was deeply influenced by Pan-African thought during his education in the United States. While studying at Lincoln University and later at Howard, he engaged with works of Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Edward Blyden. So upon returning to Nigeria, he became an advocate for continental unity, racial pride, and cultural affirmation. His book, Renaissance Africa, published in 1937, laid out a vision of African Renaissance grounded in Pan-African solidarity and anti-colonial struggle. Azikiwe also launched the West African Pilot newspaper, which became a crucial platform for disseminating Pan-Africanist ideas across Anglophone West Africa. He believed that freedom for Nigeria meant little if other African countries remained under colonial rule. He often described Nigeria as the trustee of African freedom. So Nigeria's intellectual and political presence was also felt at that landmark Fifth Pan-African Congress held in Manchester in 1945. Although, while Azikiwe was unable to attend in person, he sent a strong message of solidarity, which was read aloud during the event. And the event was attended by a lot of other Nigerians and Africans from various parts of Africa. So when we talk about when we talk about the Pan-African congresses, we must remember that this was a time of convergence. Diaspora and continental Africans, intellectuals and revolutionaries, artists and agitators, all coming together to reclaim the African future. It's something that we need to find ways of reviving today. Thanks for watching. Please join me next time as we continue this journey. Remember, the Sankofa bird looks back, not to dwell in the past, but to bring the best of it forward. Let's carry it forward together.